Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, for the first State of the Balance for the year 2016. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. We have entered a new year. The State of the Balance seems a bit still stuck in 2015. I mean, there's still some changes. There are, of course, still changes in the metagame, how people perceive the game, and sort of what strategies and doctrines are favoured. Starting with the British, things have received a big change there in the form of the buff to the AC Mark III, and obviously strategies now for the British heavily involve the AC Mark III. Generally, they'll try and rush it out as quickly as possible, so in that sense, stocking up on early anti-tank weapons as the Germans, it tends to be a good idea versus the British. But beyond that, we're also seeing a bit more, I think, sort of play towards hammer specialization and Comet tanks. People seem to be realizing, that thing's actually pretty solid. Bren guns, bolstered sections still plays heavily. Grenades, not so much in terms of emplacements. We're seeing sort of some mortar stuff there, but that's it really. Doctrinally, Vanguard has seen a slight decline. We're seeing more weapons or special weapons regiment and such. Some commando, more Royal Engineers. That seems to be getting a bit more of a sort of fondness and other things there. But beyond that, not so much has really changed for the British, except, well, overall, I suppose we're seeing less commandos, but not exactly hugely a lot less, just a bit less as other things sort of appearing. And again, that tends to be sort of focused on the armoured car. It's not like the British players are sort of really taking it to levels of the highest levels. Again, they're not for some combining it with Vanguard or operations regiments, raid operation, for example. In terms of doctrinal play, most tend to only like use a single ability or two, and then forget about the rest of the doctrines. I mean, overall, there's not so much to worry about there in that sense. There's still a lot more to work with the British, and certainly any British player who sort of uses a larger portion, I think, of the regiment will tend to, I think, do pretty well. Moving on to the Americans, rifle companies sort of hanging there in the shadows. We've seen some players sort of trying to bring it back, but currently it's more heavy cavalry, tactical support there that are sort of, the main ones that sort of see a lot of usage. So we all see armor. We do see a bit of airborne. Airborne is sort of getting in there. And I think that's sort of primarily it in that sense. In terms of how they overall play, the majority still tend to sort of go for the captain. Lieutenants see some usage, but very much captain, steward, maybe pack houses, anti-tank guns, then straight into armor. Armor usage tends to be sort of somewhere in between. In terms of sort of upgrades, they'll go for BARs and such, more bazookas, so you have to be more worried and cautious about that. Beyond that, there's not so much else that's sort of really changed with the American plan. I don't think it's because it's just bad. It's just, I think, again, how the Americans play. It's very much flavour of the month. They'll sort of go directly for one thing a lot, then they'll go directly for another thing a lot, and so it tends to be very much, again, mass sort of adoption of things, and then they'll forget about something despite it being good. And we are seeing some more variation. Again, we're seeing more players boldly using airborne. We're seeing more players sort of sticking here and there. So, I mean, it's overall in that sense looking better. Again, the Americans, I think, overall are looking pretty alright. There might be some small changes needed here and there, but overall, I think we should sort of be a bit careful about that, because otherwise you'll just sort of make the Americans all too good. Again, as we had sort of been the later stages of the last year. For the Soviets, things are heavily playing towards support weapon company with a lot of Maxims at the moment. Other things, of course, also sneak in. We're seeing more T-34s, Issue-5s, but not necessarily a lot more. Though also more T-35 Scout motor does seem to be making a bit of a return there, so also seeing more of that, and Katyushas are definitely getting a bit more popular as well. There's people also trying to figure out how to use them, and occasionally do succeed. Shock rifle still has some uses, but actually seeing less so players think just playing straight for the heavy tanks. They're sort of better at mixing in other things, though I wouldn't claim they're all masters of it as of yet. Doctrinally, again, it's got motor. Some more are beginning to use submachine gun doctrine, so you have to be a bit more cautious with the infantry, in particular, say, the Wehrmacht and playing heavy in the Ostrov. You need to sort of know how more tactics and preparations ahead for sort of when the large amount of conscript submachine guns begin hitting you. So machine guns or panzer grenadiers, for example, will be an overall pretty good idea. Beyond that, there's not so much as saying there's SOE doctrines in some sense. Probably some of the older ones could probably do with some change. I mean, there's a lot of SOE doctrines that see minimal usage and probably could do with some changes here and there to sort of make them stand a bit marked from the rest of the crowd, really. And beyond that, I don't think there's so much else to really comment on there per se. And then, of course, all of that covers the Allies. Then we come to the Axis. We have first the Oberkommando West. A lot of Volksgrenadiers with the Panzerschrecks. I still think they need to drop the Panzerschrecks on the Volksgrenadiers And like Kednev, I'm still a bit, on as well. If they really need something, that's not a Kednev, yes, infantry with a Panzerschreck, I think they should just create a separate Panzerjäger unit. Start out with a Panzerschreck, Panzerfaust, 4-man team, not 5. 5 is the wrong number when it comes to Panzerschrecks. And then based as they gain veterans, you gain another Panzerschreck. That way you can sort of later on get a double-man anti-tank team, but at the same time in a way that ensures you can't just spam them, and also just encourages not to just throw them away. Otherwise, again, just remove the bloody Panzerschreck from the Volkskanzler list. It just encourages blobbing and overall not frightfully interesting play. I'm also still a proponent of removing reinforcement from the battle group headquarters, so removing, that thing here, which just doesn't fit in with the Oberkommando. He just allows them to camp at certain points. Again, they're supposed to be an aggressive faction. To give them something that allows them to play aggressive. Like, say, a half-track that allows them to reinforce at their front line. So that, I think, is needed. Flamheads probably could do a bit, but overall same thing. It's in a sort of decent spot, I guess. Otherwise, it's perhaps the flak half-track could do with something a bit extra, and the flak emplacement still needs something. It's kind of a waste of resources at the moment, and it definitely needs something there to sort of make it a bit more bloody well useful. Beyond that, that's not so much how they play again. Some go for more Sturmpanies, so they're seeing a bit more usage. We're seeing more players rush for looks at the moment. Initially, there wasn't so much, but now we're seeing more players that are going for the looks more aggressively. Pumas and Stukas and Fuses not so much. Some go for battle group headquarters, but they generally don't make much use of it. Some will go for light infantry guns, and otherwise most players at the moment sort of try to play a bit towards the King Tiger, which does leave them very open for sort of medium armor play if they're sort of played aggressively by the Allies, though. A lot, for some reason, tend to wait up for their own big tank and then get squashed by the King Tiger, which unsurprisingly doesn't work out very well. Obersoldaten aren't seen so much at the moment, though Oberkommando players could benefit from using them a bit more, I think. Doctrinally, some Luftwaffe, a lot of Jäger, that more specifically Scavenge, they don't seem to use the Jägers very well though, so it's not too much of a threat, but of course they'll try and use the Ostmen sort of as a Ersatzpanzer to sort of try and make up for things, but in general, if you've got some good armour, it won't be able to do too much versus you. And there's definitely a bit more, I think there's sort of, the Oberkommandos players need to learn about the doctrines to fully utilise them in the fight against the enemies. They're largely all good in some senses, but, don't just go for fortification for the MG-34, similar with the Luftwaffe. There's a lot of Oberkommandos players that go for the doctrines just for a single ability, and then they just sort of forget about the rest of the doctrine, which tends to sort of place them in a bit of a not very good situation. Finally, we have the Wehrmacht. Wehrmacht, in some senses, still struggling again due to weaker Tier 2. Again, they like to make a nice company. The half-track, the 222, they lack something, and I think it's basically armor. They only like me and sort of really be seriously harmed by bullets, but at the same time also carrying an entire doctrine or tier. They don't have bazookas. There's not a guy that can put on the 222 with a bazooka, for example. He can't lay down mines. It's very vulnerable in many senses. You can't really do a lot versus the infantry either unless you get a bunch of them. So it's sort of in a weird spot, and I do think it just needs armour. Same with the 251, maybe front some suppression for the machine guns, like the company's run 251. But just make it a bit more useful, allow it to support other troops. Or if not, give it some kind of combined arms ability. Germans worked with their half tracks when they could. Do something like that then. Have it be a toggle on ability. Makes it slower, but boosts infantry working near eye. But again, bit like the combined arms ability for the Americans, in a sense. Just also means you have to be careful with it. Again, otherwise they'll just focus down the half track and knock it out. So it will require some tactics and such. And it's not like increasing the armor will make them impossible to destroy. The Allies at the moment have so many anti-tank weapons. Again, it really is hitting them. Bullets also does the trick. In particular, now also the AC has been made overall better. The Germans Tier 2 light vehicles at the moment, so they just fall behind completely. Otherwise, Wehrmacht play tends to focus a bit on mobile defense. There was a slight resurgence of elite troops and such that seem to have quickly fallen back. It's mobile defense, blitzkrieg occasionally. Ostturm is again very popular. Ostturm perhaps might need a bit of a look into somehow, perhaps making them just even a bit easier to kill or something. Just something perhaps less spamming, but at the same time it's only sort of good in the early game, and if you can't sort of push through there, the Ostturm strategy tends to sort of fall back, in particular if they face sort of upgraded, just better infantry. So, there are some things to consider there. Otherwise, Wehrmacht play to some extent still tends to be diverse. Though a lot play for Tier 4, and they never quite can't seem to get it to work. And I do think there's something that needed. They either need to make Tier 4 weaker, or they need to make the tier 4 units better, which of course at the same time creates a problem if it's a Panther, because then they also have to make the Oberkommandant Panther better somehow, but of course they could just make that even more expensive. But the problem is basically, if you go for a Panther as the Wehrmacht, it's just never going to have the impact you want it to. It's just going to sort of get crushed by everything else, so somehow it needs to be buffed. Again, it needs to be made cheaper and more accessible, but again, that creates the threat of just people rushing for them and spamming them. So, I don't know. A part of me thinks it might just be, again, making the Panther itself better, perhaps making it more useful versus infantry, and then just accepting, alright, we gotta make the Oberkommandant Panther further expensive or something. Also, just to differentiate more from the Panzer IV, and again, that also creates a problem. It's a bit tricky to say. The Sturmpanzer, though, also bloody well needs something. Either make it cheaper or make it better. I mean, Wehrmacht tier 4 is sort of in a tricky position. In most cases where you go for it, the Wehrmacht player tends to lose because it's such a massive resource investment, the opponent can sort of easily make up for it and just, crush you with sheer numbers. And the Panther can't just quite make up for that, I feel, most of the time. At least that's just how sort of things appear. Wehrmacht players, though, at the same time do make a lot of mistakes. They tend to go for Ostwind's Panzer IV, but they would tend to use this Duke, despite, several times it can easily do a lot for them. So there's probably a lot there. Wehrmacht players sort of need some improvements on. Panzer Grenadiers sort of swing back and forth. Some like to use them, some ignore them. I do think those are making a mistake. And some just get them for the Panzerschrecks alone, which I also think is a bit underestimating the power of the Panzer Grenadiers. So, I mean, there's something to consider. I mean, the current, I think, sort of popular one is just, again, going straight for tier 3, rush out of Panzer IV on Ostwind, get a lot of Grenadiers, and again, somehow struggle your way through with that. Mechanized assault players do tend to now go for a lot more assault grenadiers, and they're sort of in an awkward position, really. Perhaps just buff them up as well a bit there. But really, I think, again, the sort of issues with the Wehrmacht is part tier 2, again, the light vehicles need something extra, and tier 4 somehow needs an improvement. It's sort of an awkward position at the moment where it's just more than half the time, it just doesn't quite work out. It doesn't quite pay off, which, ends up being rather awkward. Similarly, as to some of the Wehrmacht doctrines could perhaps do with some more changes, something to make them stand out more from each other, maybe some newer abilities or some variants and call-ins. Somehow, just to give them something extra. But again, Wehrmacht in some sense is strong, but again, there are clear weak spots, and you can usually see them sort of throughout the games. Again, tier 2, weak spot again, the Wehrmacht struggles somehow to do something, and then tier 4, if they try to go for it again, zoop. Again, there's this downward motion in sort of what the Wehrmacht can actually do. It's sort of tier 1, tier 3, that's sort of real strength, tier 2, tier 4. I mean, tier 2 is not bad, but it's a light vehicles that basically drag it down. Similarly, Wehrmacht tier 4 just drags it down, there's less usage for them. Though again, it's interesting enough, a lot of Wehrmacht players try to skip tier 2 and just go for tier 3, and just try to stay strong and maybe sort of front storm to sort of keep it going there. Though I suspect we might eventually try and see more go for it. So I think that sort of rather covers the state of the balance. And again, of course, have to see how it sort of works out here between now January and, of course, into February. Though so far there's been nothing from Relic in terms of, patches. They might just say, oh, hey, there's a cut going on. Let's not muck it up. But at the same time, they shouldn't just hold down the entire sort of multiplayer just for a bunch of few people, because ultimately, even though the viewers and the ones playing the ESL Cup, I don't think they make up the majority of the ones who just play the game online as well. So it just seems a bit, weird. Well, we're doing a bit for some people. Let's just tell the others things sort of, go sod off while we do that. That seems a bit, myopic, to be honest. In particular, when again, it could make for the more interesting to watch in the ESL part as well. That, of course, is just my opinion. Of course, that might be horribly, horribly wrong, but, it just seems a bit awkward in some senses. Again, overall, we sort of keep looking at from, say, early last year. I mean, it's overall the state of the balance is stronger, it's better, we're seeing overall more varied tactics and strategy. That is good. But at the same time, we can sort of still pick out clear parts where things just sort of get awkward, break down, crash again, and so, get stuck in a rut. Sort of looking at different parts of the armies. But I think we'll sort of stop here before I just keep going on forever. But hopefully this has been educational. Hopefully this can give you a stronger idea of sort of what you can do and what to expect and how you maybe be able to exploit it. And if it did, subscribe, like, tell your friends, share it with everyone but your enemies. Tell them to go sort themselves. So thank you all, and hope to see you all another time. This is Imperial saying cheers.